Hey everyone, thanks for joining me again. I just wanted to thank everybody who's reached out to me and had some thoughtful and engaging conversations, whether it was colleagues, friends, family, childhood friends. I appreciate those interactions a lot, and I appreciate that you want me to share some of my wisdom with you. I had two things on my mind that I really wanted to share with people. One, I want you to just realize that sometimes we're scared to do race and equity work because we're afraid of making mistakes, but just accept the fact now that you're probably going to make mistakes. I make mistakes sometimes, but when I do make mistakes, I'm willing to learn. And if we all keep that mindset, I think it makes the work much easier. And then the second thing is, please remember that this is not personal. No one's trying to personally attack you, that we're talking about the systems that have been put in place that benefit people over time, and we're trying to dismantle these 400-year-old systems, and that's tough work. And in full transparency, I did this work, I still do this work on myself, because coming from a small rural Michigan town, I had a lot of stereotypes and biases my own self that I really needed to work on, and I'm still working through in order to be the best equity worker that I can be. And I wanted to share just 3 tips with you guys. And it's learn, reflect, and confront. And I just try to use this when I'm doing the work. So the first thing that you should do is educate yourself, because the more that you know, the more wisdom that you have to share with others, and the more that you can understand. So a lot of people didn't get a lot of history of other groups of Americans, like Black Americans, Latino Americans, Asian Americans, Native Americans, and we don't understand their context fully. So that makes it hard to understand why people are so outraged, why they're so upset, why they're so angry, why they're so hurt, because we don't understand their history. So I'm going to share with you a couple of resources. Cracking the Codes, The System of Racial Inequity is a great documentary. The Danger of a Single Story by Chimamanda is one of my favorite TED Talks, and I love Chimamanda's, just a side note. And Peggy McIntosh has a TED Talk called How to Recognize Your White Privilege and Use It to Fight Inequality. She really has some great analogies in there. A couple of books, as I mentioned before, so you want to talk about race, How to Be an Anti-Racist, Waking Up White, White Like Me, Reflections on Race from a Privileged Son. And those, I think, are excellent place to start, because especially like the TED Talks and documentaries, because they're shorter and they really break things down and give you application. The next step is to reflect. Part of this work requires all of us to sit with discomfort and get used to being uncomfortable. If we just stay in our bubble of safety, we're never going to push past these biases and stereotypes that we have. And many of the beliefs that we have been passed down over time, and they come with things that are maybe sexist or racist, and we need to take the time to really think about why we think about things the way that we do, because that is part of this work. Thinking about privilege and disadvantage can bring up a lot of negative emotions, such as anger, shame, fear, and frustration, and that's all completely normal. So if you feel like that, again, think about why. One of my mentors always says feedback is a gift, and most of the time it never feels like it in the moment, but once you apply that feedback and you really realize that that other person is just trying to communicate with you a way to be better, is very beneficial. And as a teacher, I try to take the feedback that I'm given and almost apply it the next day, because I'm always on a continuous journey of self-improvement. Peggy McIntosh reminds us that everyone has a combination of having more than we've earned and less than we've earned. And she expresses in her TED Talk that it was hard for her to begin to learn about privilege, but she goes on to be one of the most renowned speakers about privilege, and her work is very commendable. Lastly, confront. Avoiding the conversation about race is not going to make racial injustices go away. Actually, it's pretty much the opposite. Much of the research confirms that when we don't talk about race and we ignore it, we're actually continuing the biases that exist in the world. And I have these conversations about race with my own grandma, and I will tell you, they were pretty awkward at first, but now they're not anymore. And my grandma's learned so much, and she's learned how to talk about race, and she's learned how to confront racial biases. And, you know, just remember, niceness has nothing to do with being in a system that's oppressive, or even if you're the one that benefits from it, doesn't mean nobody's saying, oh, you're a bad person, you're not nice. We're just trained a certain way, and we're trained to think a certain way. Even one time, one of my friends from work said, oh, get your cotton picking hands off of that. And that was the first time she'd ever said that phrase to a black person. And in that moment, she felt the weight of the racial bias that that phrase carried. How many other phrases like that, or how many messages like that do we receive that we don't even think about? In closing, I want to share something from you, or with you, from So You Want to Talk About Race. You're going to screw this up. You're going to screw this up royally, more than once. I'm sorry. I wish I could say that reading this book would guarantee that you'd never leave a conversation about race feeling like you've gotten it all wrong and made everything worse, but I can't. It's going to happen. It's going to happen, and you should have these conversations anyway. I think that is such a beautiful thing to just recognize, and if that's one thing that you can take away, I really hope that you can do that. And the resources that I mentioned in the learn part will be in the bio. Thanks.